watching that while thank you for my partner Tina for remembering to hit record, since I just said in the chat that we are recording. I think those are the main housekeeping notes. For those of you on Zoom, you can use the closed caption button. For those of you in the room, we don't have closed captioning, so you'll just have to listen real good, okay? So those are the housekeeping notes, I think. And I'm going to stop sharing what I'm sharing so that we can get our presenters' information up here. Oh, I'm sharing from a different computer. So presenter, Mr. James, make your way over here. And those of you on Zoom, you can look at him while I stop sharing. Things you learn when you do something for the first time. Okay, so. No, not at all. It's a we'll make sure everybody's muted, please. It takes something really special to bring the webinar into an in-person space. You've really got to have something very compelling these days to get people out of their houses, put clothes on, be presentable, and come listen to someone. So we have someone really special who got all of you in the room out of your houses, and those of you watching on Zoom, you were willing to be on Zoom with us. So thank you. I'm very happy to introduce to our group Mr. Michael F. James, the author of Dear Judy, a love story rewritten by Alzheimer's. I first became aware of Mr. James's book last Christmas, in the break between the holidays and when we came back in January. And I read that book on my Christmas vacation. It was a real gift to me to read about Mr. James and his experience of caring for his wife, Judy, their participation in clinical research. And that's all I'm gonna say, because I want him to tell his story. So with that, let's get your slides up. And the floor is yours. I'll do that. You just stand there and look impressive. And I will. Very easy for you to do, for sure. I'll get these up. And hopefully that everybody in the room can see it, and hopefully all of you on Zoom. I'm going to go over to the chat if you need to ask me a question. And I present to you Mr. Michael F. James from Lincoln, Nebraska, people. Lincoln, Nebraska.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you all who are here in the room, and all of those of you who are out in Zoom land virtually, for giving up some of your day to this presentation. I'm really gratified by this response, and I want to thank Kelly and the whole team here at the KU Alzheimer's Research Center for inviting me. And I especially want to thank the Edmonds family for first putting copies of this book in the hands of people here at KU. So thank you all. I'm very grateful. I was telling, is it Tony, who your partner, Tina, a few years ago, and because of this setup, I have to kind of stay where I am. My wife Linda and I went to New York City for a week, and one of the things we did was the Stephen Colbert Show, which is a live taping, and it was really fun and exciting, but we didn't see him for the whole monologue because there was a camera right in front of between him and where we were sitting. So some of you have a partial view today. Sorry about that, but it's how, and you'll be directed looking up this way momentarily. So let me tell you a few things. Let's see. About the book. It is a memoir. Memoirs are always suspect. So I agree with every one of these statements, including Isabel Allende's statement that memoir is a form of fiction. I tried to be as honest and truthful in telling this story as Elie Wiesel would have expected. But I did create a few things here and there, both for the flow of the story and also to kind of fill in gaps, because I wanted to avoid the whole TMI challenge in writing a memoir. But I also agree with Sue Monk Kidd that the stories, all of our stories, need to be told. And every life is a story. And when you listen to people's stories, they're often very compelling stories. And it's certainly true of certainly every Alzheimer's story that I've touched in some way or that's touched me in some way. They're important stories and they're valuable stories. And I hoped when I wrote this that it would help people who might be facing a similar journey or launching into something, either as a partner, primary caregiver, or a child primary caregiver, or just as an observer of family or friends who were going through something similar. And that was really the impetus for putting this together. It is a love story. When Judy died, we had been married for 43 years. I had really had the 50 number fixed in my head, and that was disappointing that we didn't make it. But we had 43 really, really great years, and I still feel grateful for having had that. A lot of people have asked me how I remembered all this stuff. Did I keep journals? Did I keep diaries? I did actually make journal entries in various notebooks that I had. I also kept a steady flow of email going to friends and family, especially in the years leading up to Judy's moving into full-time memory care. But for the last stage of the whole journey, those last 5 months that she was in memory care, I did Caring Bridge, which I'm sure many of you know about. And it worked out beautifully because at that point, I had a lot of people coming to me. We were fortunate over the years to have traveled a lot, mostly business related, but also for pleasure, and had made friends in all parts of the world. And they were all concerned about how Judy was doing at that point when she was living in full-time memory care. And so I had heard of Caring Bridge and I turned to it, and it became a perfect vehicle for communicating with all the people who were interested, but really only having to do it once. Well, the upshot of that was that a very detailed record of those last months was held in, sorry about that, in the pages of Caring Bridge, and I turned to that. In fact, the genesis of the book also was there, because you'll see I underlined midway through the page a comment that a friend who actually appears in the book said, "I see a book in your future." At that point in time, it was the last thing I was thinking of. But as the subsequent years passed, and as I approached retirement from the University of Nebraska, where I was a faculty member, I started thinking about both what he had said and the fact that I was soon to gain a lot of time that I hadn't had for 20 years. No more meetings, no more committees, no more students and courses. So I decided at the beginning of 2020 that I would set about writing this memoir. And then the frosting on the cake, in a way, was the pandemic, because that freed up a lot of time. And time that we would have spent traveling, we couldn't. In fact, right now, the publishing world is seeing a whole sort of burst of books on the scene that were all different authors' pandemic books. Well, this sort of was mine. In this, I just comment on the photo. Judy is in the Tilton Space Tilton Space wheelchair that you see on the left of the photo. This was in the garden of the memory care residence where she spent the last 5 months of her life. She was the youngest person in this facility. And it worked out beautifully, really beautifully for us. Now, I should explain that throughout the book, pretty consistently, I changed the names of people, personnel, all businesses. I do identify the University of Nebraska Medical Center where we did the clinical trial. But other than that, pretty much everything I changed, and there were several reasons. One, I didn't want to seem to be endorsing a particular business. Also, businesses change administration, they change direction, they change ownership, they change staff, and especially in memory care and home care services, there is a very high turnover of staff. So I felt it easier to give everybody a kind of different, slightly different identity and different names. Now, of course, I know who all these people are, and people who are close to me know who some of these people are. It seemed best to protect everybody's privacy to the degree that I could. And so I'm going to read 3 passages from the book. One very early on that gives you a little background about us and how this got going. A little further on, a couple of years into the disease, where I talk about how Judy kind of filled her time in the course of a day when she was still able to be left alone at home. That was okay for a few years, but eventually it wasn't. And then a final passage near the end of the journey, a few months before her death, that was a pretty startling experience, as you'll see. So this is in the first chapter of the book. For the first time in nearly 4 decades of marriage, we were earning enough to cover all of our needs and more. This isn't always advancing. There we go. We were finally able to begin to save for retirement, one of the attractions of the day job offer that had added to its appeal. Now, at this point, I'm talking about what brought us to Nebraska and the start of full-time real employment after 25 years as a independent studio artist and itinerant teacher. The years of running large credit card balances and hoping always that something would come along so that we could pay them off were behind us. Although I'd achieved a respectable level of success as a visual artist and writer with a couple of books to my credit, and she'd successfully co-launched a retail business that had a faithful clientele and was meeting payroll and paying her bills on time, those years back east were always conditioned by financial stresses. Though proximity to our families and their emotional support and encouragement helped, that could sometimes act as an irritant. I recall my mother-in-law saying within earshot more than once, "Someday when Michael has a real job," an ego-bruising affirmation that she didn't take artistic enterprise, at least my artistic enterprise, seriously. The irony there was that when the real job came along, it turned out to be half a continent away, which meant that our need for financial and career security would ultimately take Judy from her hometown and leave her widowed mother alone. "We'll come back often," she reassured her. We kept that promise, though there was a second irony in our putting such a great distance between us just as Flo entered her 80s. She would outlive her daughter. When Judy sold her business ahead of our move, she'd already made the decision to enroll in the textile design master's degree program. For her, the opportunity to go to graduate school at that point in life was payback for the many years of long work days and tight retail margins. The time for serious creative work that had eluded her for so many years was now available. And becoming a graduate teaching assistant in a design program gave her entree to both visual arts studios and the classroom. She shone in both domains. I'm not sure I ever told her how much pride I felt watching her grow into both roles she assumed, that of student and that of university teacher. She learned quickly and had a natural gift for generously transferring to others the knowledge and skills she'd acquired. The fact that I was on the faculty in the department in which she was working toward her degree meant that I knew both the territory and the personnel that populated it, and I could see how easily both the faculty and other students related to her, how comfortable they were around her. Most had no trouble confiding in her because she was a good listener. She gave them her full attention and was never judgmental. Those are good qualities to have in just about any situation, and especially in a small, close-knit academic department. Once Judy was awarded her degree, she launched straight away into a disciplined studio practice, and her textile art grew richer and more complex. She discovered processes of fabric manipulation and transformation that were a perfect fit for her aesthetic sensibilities, and she quickly turned them to her own expressive purposes. She became a member of a tribe of passionate makers who turned folded, pleated, clamped, stitched, printed, dyed, and over-dyed lengths of fabric into visual art that straddled the borderland between the physical and the immaterial. She'd found a new way to communicate at just that point in her life where she had things to say and the self-confidence and the skills with which to say them. What we didn't know at that time was that the disease had already left the starting gate. Its assault on the neurons in her brain launched stealthily, imperceptibly. In cases of younger onset Alzheimer's, as we'd learn later, it's typical that the destructive processes of the buildup of tau and amyloid proteins in the brain begins years before the first symptoms appear. It's likely that in Judy's case, as she was refining new creative skills and applying them in the studios where she worked, in the classrooms where she was teaching, Alzheimer's was already beginning the program of erasure that it would carry out so relentlessly and completely, robbing her of all that new knowledge and of so much more. Her brain was working at cross purposes, and neither she nor I had the slightest idea. And I'm talking there about the years 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007, when I started seeing signs, something wasn't right. But these, what I call glitches, just strange expressions or strange sort of confabulations that didn't sound right. They happened so infrequently that I was able to dismiss them. And eventually, when I finally did say, gee, what's that about? She would kind of poo-poo it off. And I wanted to do the same thing, obviously, until we could no longer ignore it. In this next section, I sort of talk about the day-to-day several years into, she got diagnosed in 2009, official diagnosis. We actually got a second opinion because I wasn't sure in the end. And you know, for some of the symptoms, there could be a number of different causes. And I was hoping that, you know, maybe we'd find out it wasn't Alzheimer's. And once we did, then, of course, the whole process of learning about the disease and experiencing all of the sort of cumulative changes that it would ask of us in every aspect of our lives. That became the kind of agenda for those first years. So I'm talking here about the day-to-day, let's say about 2011, 2010 into 2011. I would start my day at 5 a.m. at the gym. Then I'd get back home before Judy stirred. I'd have breakfast over the day's paper, get lunch put together for each of us, mine to take with me, write up any reminders, suggestions, or to-dos that she'd need for the time she'd be on her own. I'd wake her sometime between 7:30 and 8 and leave for campus as soon as she'd settled into breakfast. And then I'd hope she'd be okay until I returned. In the first couple of years, she was. The disease, though, quietly extinguished her early determination to continue with her art making. The kind of critical thinking and processing that serious creative work requires became harder for her to initiate. There were dark moments when she understood this, and it added to her sadness. Most days, though, after showering and dressing, she would settle down in the room she used as her studio and lose herself in curating and organizing the contents of drawers, storage containers, large and small, and the surfaces of her work tables. She'd handle and sort fabrics and arrange them in groups, stacking leftover remnants whose colors or tonalities pleased her. I think that all things tactile grew in importance for her. Feeling those fabrics, folding and refolding them, sandwiching them in different ways, offered her a measure of comfort and satisfaction that helped to fill some of the solitude she occupied. She paid similar attention to her various collections: stones, sea glass, and small shells, a collection of objects given up by various beaches we'd walked and hikes we'd taken and travels over the course of many years, could take her back to those places, at least in spirit. From her home sewing days, she'd amassed a large catch of unusual buttons that she'd originally purchased because they promised to serve as singular finishing touches in the clothes she made for herself. She'd sort and resort them in plastic containers subdivided by numerous small compartments. Making decisions about which buttons to group together and how to distribute groups of buttons of varying sizes and colors must have helped her feel a sense of control, a sense that she could still manage those things that had, over many years, inspired her. It was much the same with the photographs, artists' exhibition announcement cards, and the other accumulated miscellany that she'd pinned to her studio walls since she'd taken over that space. During many of those long days alone in her workroom, she'd sort and rearrange them, matching or mismatching according to the patterns or textures or colors they contained. It became a kind of work in progress with no declared objective and no outward significance other than it helped the hours to pass. At the same time, I imagine there was some creative value for her in bringing odds and ends together, in making decisions about how to arrange them and how to store them. I'd ask what she had in mind when she grouped these things here, those there, what she was thinking when she moved the contents of this drawer to an abutting one, what she wanted to say with a small altar-like display that appeared on this table one day and then on another across the room the next, enlarged and reconfigured. "I just like to do this," she'd reply. "It's what I like to do." It would be frustrating, I have to say. Sometimes I'd come home and the bed would be covered with stuff, and I'd have to convince her that it would be okay, that we could put it back, but we had to sleep, so on and so forth. I think one of, you think back, and if I had known, if I had realized, I would have said this, I would have done that. I didn't see, honestly, at the time, I didn't see these things as much more than an annoyance because it just complicated the day-to-day. One thing I did in the book in a number of places, often at the start of a chapter, I addressed Judy directly, which is how that epistolary title came. And occasionally in other places. And this is one where I'm going to read a short section that's addressed to her that touches on this issue of hindsight. Were you trying to locate some semblance of order in that disarray? Stephen Sondheim's character, George Seurat, opens the musical Sunday in the Park with George, declaring, "White, a blank page or canvas. The challenge, bring order to the whole." Is that what you were doing? While I was downstairs in my own studio trying for a different kind of visual and expressive order, were you working at something similar upstairs? I didn't see it at the time, and you never gave me more to go on than, "It's just what I'm doing. I like it. Don't touch anything. Leave it alone." Now I think that somehow for you, it was a creative enterprise. What intellectual power you still possessed, directing calculations and decisions towards some order known only to you. I wish I'd seen it at the time. That curating process eventually devolved into what you see here, this sort of snapshot where there was no longer any semblance of order. It was just a mishmash. And Judy would sometimes stand at this dresser for a couple of hours just moving things around. And, you know, it was something to do. Now, in this next and final section that I'm going to read, I'm going to tell you about an experience that really flipped me upside down. This takes place in it was the beginning of June of 2015. She died mid-August 2015. She had been living full-time in the facility that I call North Side in the book since March, mid-March of that year. So mercifully, she was only in that end stage for 5 months because there were residents at North Side who had been there for 12, 15 years. She had started in day services earlier in the year. That was, I tell the story about how I tried different day service options that she rejected, but this one she accepted. So that started a whole kind of slow integration process, which worked out beautifully for us. So that when she finally moved in full-time in mid-March, she never once said to me, "I want to go home, take me home." And that was one of the most painful things for caregivers to hear from their loved ones in the memory care residence. So I tell the story of how I kind of finagled to that. You have to read the book if you haven't. So now she's been there full-time for a couple of months. Whenever I visited Judy, once, often twice, even 3 times some days, I'd update her on where I'd been, who I'd seen, what I'd done. We'd sometimes sit on the edge of her bed or on a commons room sofa, and I'd scroll friends' Facebook postings, my own too, sharing this one's latest selfie and that one's chemotherapy update and another's note of encouragement. Usually none of this elicited from her more than a weak smile or a murmur of accord, though there were 1 or 2 brief moments when clarity shone through the fog to stunning effect. Barely 2 weeks into hospice care, and in fact, she started in hospice care on May 20th, 2015, which was our 43rd wedding anniversary. Wasn't the way I had anticipated acknowledging that day, but you have it, there you have it. Barely 2 weeks into hospice care, she brought me up short and sharp with an understanding so acute and unexpected that I felt like a clap of thunder had exploded beneath the ceiling fixture in her room. The evening before, I joined 100 or so guests, mostly friends and colleagues, at a campus museum for a preview reception of an exhibition of the new work I'd completed over the course of the previous 2 years. Working with the invaluable help of my studio assistant, Sam Vaughn, and employing the team from A Trusted Friend, which is the name I gave to the home care agency that we used, had allowed me to bring renewed focus to my studio practice. I'd felt real inspiration to translate into visual form the Alzheimer's experience that we were living. And through trial and error, I'd figured out how I'd do that. Now the 14 pieces that resulted from that fertile period were beautifully installed against the gallery's gray walls. I spoke in the gallery for 15 minutes or so, explaining the roots of the work in our shared Alzheimer's journey. I expressed regret that Judy was unable to be there, but shared the memory of how, before she'd moved into full-time memory care, she sometimes sat halfway down my studio stairway and watched the progress of a good number of the exhibited works. And the view of my studio at that time that you see in the lower left is exactly the view she would have had from the midway up that stairway. When I ended my reflections, the visitors applauded generously. I stopped them just as they began to disperse. "Wait," I said, "let me take a photo of all of you." Holding my smartphone above my head, I did just that, and the reception played itself out. Later that evening, after going back to Northside and helping Judy with what were by now well-established nightly routines, and seeing her comfortably put to bed, I headed home. Before putting myself to bed, I reported the evening's exhibition reception on Facebook and uploaded the photo I'd taken of my audience. It was an acknowledgement to them of my appreciation and encouragement to others to think about seeing the show. Early the next morning, I headed back to Northside, intent on talking with one of the hospice nurses when she checked in. While we waited, I scrolled the latest batch of Facebook postings. Sitting alongside me as usual, Judy watched images and text comments come and go. Suddenly, the photo of the gallery visitors from the previous evening slid by. I returned to it, spreading my fingers across the smartphone screen to enlarge the photo. "Here's everyone who came to my exhibit opening last evening," I said. It was the first time I'd mentioned the event to her. She'd known most of the folks who'd been at the opening, and she'd seen much of the work as it came into being in my studio. She'd made art herself and exhibited it both in this country and abroad. We'd gone to countless artist exhibition openings over the course of our life together, always connected in one way or another to arts communities. No question, she knew that milieu. She looked at the photo, then looked at me. There was a sudden brightness in her eye, a sharpness as if some thin scrim had been pulled aside and light allowed to cleanse the air, to bring everything into focus. She looked back at the photo. "Why wasn't I there?" she asked, with as much presence of mind as I'd ever known her to display. The piercing appropriateness and logic of the question, how it revealed her full, if momentary, comprehension, left me guiltily speechless. I'd considered bringing her along to the reception, but I decided that that was wishful and wistful thinking. Her aphasia was advanced, apraxia and ataxia had combined to badly compromise her mobility, and I feared she'd be regarded more with pity than with empathy. Her disease and its devilish machinations, its relentless and rude transformation of the life we'd built together was, after all, the subject of the work, and therefore so was Judy. To expose her vulnerability in that context would have been grossly unfair, maybe even abusive. I intended for her to see the show, but I intended to choose a day and time when we'd most likely be alone in the gallery. When we'd be able to view it with some assurance of relative privacy. In that shockingly insightful moment, it felt as though she'd caught me in a lie. Unprepared, I came back with, "I'm taking you tomorrow. We'll see it together tomorrow," trying to sound as reassuring as possible. All she said was okay. I scrolled upward and the previous evening disappeared. And in fact, the very next day, I did take her to see the show. I had two friends visiting both from out of town, and they helped to do the transfers in and out of the wheelchair into the car and into the museum and so on. It turned out that this was the very last time she left the memory care facility, because in the course of that day, we realized it was becoming too painful for her to be moved. It was as if she was feeling pain in all different parts of her body. And when she finally ended up in tears as we tried to get her back into the car from home, because after we went to the museum, I took her home. So it was also the last time she spent in our home. We had lunch there, and actually that went pretty well once she was in and settled. But it was the moving part that was, well, I just realized that was over. You've seen a lot of fabric in these images, and that was one of the things that really lasted for her right through to the end. Somebody in the memory care facility, you see in the third photograph, came in one day with about a dozen fabric swatches that this person had overlocked and put grommets in one corner and a ring binder, sort of ring thing to hold them together, and gave that to Judy. And in the last couple of months of her life, that collection of actually fabrics that she wouldn't have gone near when she was selling fabric or when she was sewing with fabric, it just became very important for her to be touching fabric. She would fold the fabric or pleat the fabric. Sometimes I'd see her sort of mimicking threading a needle in thin air. So obviously she was going through these processes that it was tacit knowledge that she had kept within her and that she'd been able to maintain right to the end. Let's see. So I learned a lot of things in the process of this whole experience. Probably the biggest learning for me was how to be patient. And in the first few years, I wasn't always patient. And it's a huge challenge for caregivers to sort of learn how to be in the moment with the loved one that you're caring for. And it took me quite a few years. I eventually got there. And I think today, I'm marginally more patient than I was before the whole experience. Type A, it's tough. These are some recommendations I would offer, and I offer them in sort of the context of a group that I'm a part of. I'm part of a husband caregivers. There are 8 of us now. Some of us started meeting in 2010 just for coffee. Some of us got to know each other when we found that our wives were in the same memory care facility. And then we've added members since, and some members have moved out of town, so they've moved on. But we've got this kind of core group, and once a month we meet for lunch. Just in the last year, 2 new members have come in, both of whom are caring for wives with both of whom have younger onset Alzheimer's. The rest of us, the other 6 of us, are all widowed. The most recent member became a widower last June, so it's sort of stretched over time all of these different voyages and experiences. But it really offers to the new guys in the group information, opportunities to ask questions based on real lived experience. And that is a huge thing. I would say live as fully as you and your loved one can for as long as you can. And that we did, and I'm happy about that. We found that taking long road trips suited both of us. And one thing about those trips, it always felt like we could leave Alzheimer's at home. Stick it in the, catch-all drawer by the garage door. It would be there when we got back, but it usually didn't rear its ugly head too much while we were traveling. Ask for help when you need it. Be realistic about what you can do and honest about what you can't. Your health matters too. And that's a real critical one. I asked for help a couple of times among our closest friends and associates. But it's problematic when those people are fully employed professionals and have families of their own, have complicated lives. And one of the pluses for people with family in proximity is that family you can usually count on, at least for some help. And unfortunately for us, our families were dispersed all over the country, but not within striking range. So that was a bit of a problem. And when I finally was able to employ in-home care, that was a huge shift for me, and it opened up possibility again. But that's very expensive. And I was lucky. I had a 6-figure income. I had very good health insurance. I had a very flexible schedule. So I could accommodate myself, my job to this disease. A lot of people, I'd say most people don't have that privilege and that luxury. And if you make the average US wage of, I think it's probably around $61,000 a year on average now across the country, you don't have enough money to spend 2 to 3 upwards of $3,500 a month on in-home care. And so it's a challenge to get that help. I'd say strongly urge people to find a group of people like-minded and similarly experienced people that you can bounce challenges off of, and you'll always hear a story that makes you feel like, well, at least my story isn't as bad as that, and that kind of is a little bit of a load off. We had a great experience with the clinical trial that we participated in up at UNMC. It was, I can't remember if it was launched in 2010 or we started it in 2011, but it was already the third round of that, I think, at that point. Anyway, that was a great experience because it gave Judy a sense that she was helping, and that was really important to her. And it gave me a sense that I was getting monitoring of her condition that I wouldn't have been able to facilitate or even afford otherwise. So that was, and even though the particular trial that we were involved in did not end with results that showed any significant advantage for the sufferers, I feel still, and I felt at the time, that for that 18-month period that she was in the clinical trial, for her, she was totally stable. And very soon after the end of the trial, things started going south. And there was a in the trial results that we were sent, there was a very small group of people that showed some, it wasn't like a definitive improvement, but they said it was such a small group that it wasn't, really impactful. But I like to believe that Judy was in that small group that had a little bit of relief. It makes sense, They tell us this on airlines. The oxygen mask deploys, put yours on first and then your loved ones. And that's important to keep in mind when you're a caregiver. And I participated in Alzheimer's, we both did, from 2013, 14, by the walk in 2015, she had died, and I participated in that with a lot of friends and raised a fair amount of money for Alzheimer's research. And I continue to support that and encourage you to do that too. You all have heard that story. So I do have some copies of the book here. If anybody's interested, it's available online at pineedenpress.com. You can also order it from Amazon and Barnes & Noble. I will tell you that those are print-on-demand editions, and they're perfectly, everything's there. It's a good product, but my edition is limited, sort of, I think of it as the bibliophiles edition. It's got gatefolds, so it's a soft cover, but it's got gatefolds, and it's got deckled edges, and it's got thicker paper. I mean, nobody cares about this, I was saying to somebody last week, if I had to do it over again, I would go the POD route. But anyway, any questions? Kelly? Oh, sure.
The question is, what enabled Judy's final diagnosis to be given in 2009? That is, was there a specific test like a PET scan or certain symptoms? When did you need in-home care, mid-stage, advanced stage? Basically everything this person would like to know. Thank you.
It is all, that's all in the book. How we got the diagnosis was in fall of 2008, we were connected through our tax accountant to a financial advisor. Our accountant said, "Do you guys have a financial advisor?" We said, "No." "You need a financial advisor." I said, "Yeah, I know we need one." "All right, this is the person you contact." She's Roxanne in the book. She's still my financial advisor. I saw her last week. She is a great person with a wonderful personality, and I think it comes through in the book. And we started seeing her, and in one of those early meetings, she said to me, well, to both of us, "Do you guys have long-term care insurance?" And I really, in hindsight, way too quickly said, "No, but I'd love to have it." Because I had been noticing those signs, and it just didn't seem right, and I was nervous, and my first thought was, get long-term care insurance now before it gets worse. Well, it was already too late, because they sent a nurse. Well, first they did sort of like mini mental status exam over the phone, both of us. And then I got a call back from the insurer saying that they needed to do Judy's face-to-face, that some people didn't do well over the phone, and they'd like to come out and do that. So that was a little bit of a red flag. And a month after they did the much lengthier exam in our home, we got a letter saying that she was denied due to, now I know that phrase, I know that sentence, I had it in my head and now I've just lost it, but failure to meet minimum cognitive standards. And once you get that, that's the end of that. So we would not have long-term care insurance for her. I reached the point by late 2012 early 2013, where I was no longer comfortable leaving her at home alone. But she resisted, and patients often do. They don't want somebody in my home. I don't need anybody here. And all those same arguments she gave me. But I finally, through a kind of a ruse, got a home care person in our home for a day. I tell that story. Her mother happened to be visiting, and that was kind of the ruse. And it worked. She liked the person, and I said, would she be able to come back? Oh, yeah, I like her. She can come back anytime. And that was the beginning of building a team. And over a few months, we built a team of 4 people that she connected with. And we had as many in through the house who she didn't connect with. A couple of times she was very adamant, I do not want that person back. Okay, you don't have to have her back. We'll find somebody else. And the agency I worked with was really helpful in facilitating that. And then as time moved on, the cost of that in-home care just became untenable. And that was what finally motivated me to find a memory care facility. And I started out with day services thinking that get her used to it, then if she has to move in, it wouldn't be that as traumatic. And it wasn't. And that's exactly what happened. It wasn't the first place we tried. It was the second place we tried. But she never rejected it. And I feel grateful for that. Every time, I still remember this little woman, probably like 5'2". Every time I came to visit Judy, she would be near the door. And she'd usually have an envelope in her hand, and she'd say, hold the door. I got to get this into the mailbox. I can't remember her name, but let's say her name was Anita. I'm sorry, Anita. You stay here, and we'll make sure the postman comes in when he brings the mail. You know, and fortunately, that was not our experience. Does that answer that question? I think
that's a great answer. There's another question. Realized something was radically wrong in her brain. How did she?
What was interesting about, I mean, Judy, you know, she's very sharp, very well educated, tech savvy enough to know how to use a computer. She never, at least I never saw any evidence that she was trying to analyze this diagnosis or this new state of affairs. She really, at first, she really went into denial. And in fact, she was explicit about that. I don't want you to tell anyone. Okay, we won't say anything. That's not me. And I couldn't, because the signs were now becoming evident to anybody who'd interface with us. So I did tell a few very close friends, and I told family members, immediate family members. And it was about, well, it was probably 18 months after the diagnosis that finally she got to the point where I heard her telling someone at a dinner party we were hosting one evening, oh, do you know I have Alzheimer's? And that I sort of took as her acceptance of this, you know, this condition. And she would get angry at herself, but she'd also joke about it. And there were a few moments where she would say flippantly, well, I'll have to remember that, knowing full well that it wasn't, whatever it was, wasn't going to stick. So she managed to keep a sense of humor. It wasn't always there, but it sort of reared its happy head often enough to keep things kind of pacific, I guess is the word. Any questions in the room? Yes.
Acceptance. That's kind of typical. People go through that.
like for you as a caregiver. Notice. Yeah. From here on out. People online, I'm not sure they would have heard that entirely, but the question sort of it involves when I kind of like reached a point of kind of accepting this new state of affairs and where that occurred in the course of the early part of the disease. This is a advantage in some respects in terms of my personality and my how I deal with the world. I tend to be a problem solver. If there's a problem, I'm going to try to find a solution. I tend to be proactive. Now that can be a drawback too. You know, if you live with somebody like that, just ask my son, you know. But at first, I didn't want it to be true. She certainly didn't. When all of the things that the disease would do started to become apparent, her mantra was, I just want my life back. That's how she saw it. She saw her life being taken from her, which it was. You know, no more going to book club, no more, you know, meeting with friends on the spur, you know, eventually no more driving. That was a little bit of a challenge. I mean, I knew that I'd have to deal with that. We had a number of instances where she'd phone me, I'd be in my office at school and said, I'm lost. Where are you? "Oh, I don't know. Can you see a street sign? Well, yeah, it's not here. Well, go to the street sign and tell me where you are. Then I'd bring it up on the map. Okay. A couple of times this happened, and each time was because the city had blocked traffic and she had to go, you know, slightly different route. I mean, something she would have figured out easily before. It wasn't dangerous. It was a little bit of an inconvenience. Finally, I tell the story, we're pulling out of a cul-de-sac. She can't get the car to move forward. In her defense, it was a stick shift. So, you know, those are gone, but we always had stick shifts. And I finally figured out after several attempts, she had the emergency brake on and she was trying to go forward with the emergency brake on and it wasn't. Now you know, you or I would look down and, oh, got to put the emergency brake down, but that didn't even occur to her. And I realized that, again, it wasn't dangerous, but if she got in an accident, if there were a police officer on hand and he's trying to figure out what happened here, who's to blame, and this type of thing is happening, whether she was at fault or not, this was not going to wash. And that was when I said, we got her tested. They kind of put some restrictions. Now I understand in Nebraska, I just learned this recently, that if you get a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia, you are automatically not able to drive. She actually went to the DMV, went to the motor vehicles place on her own, unscheduled, and got her renewal. And this was after I had already seen it come. I told her she got a renewal. I said, we have to talk about this because I'm thinking if they examine her in some way, you know, there's no way she'll pass this. She did somehow. She was very proud of herself too, that she'd gotten, you know, but I was very concerned about the risks, you know, to her and to anybody else on the road. So fortunately, when it happened, the only crimp in that experience was that while the car was in the garage, every time we went in the garage, she'd go to her car. And then she'd often break down if I said, no, we're going in my car. So I finally sold the car a couple of months after I stopped driving and got rid of the car. And once it was gone, it was fine. Every once in a while, we had Saabs in those days, and every once in a while, we'd see one on the road and she'd say, "Oh, there's a Saab." I loved my Saab. So, it was, we all know driving is our independence. It's super important. It's a big deal. But it's also one of the things that we really can't let pass because it's too big a risk. Yes. She was 61. 61, and she died just shy of her 67th birthday. What you just described with the automobile, yeah, it's interesting. People handle this in different ways. I've heard of some people who are kind of self-policing and they slow themselves down and just stop driving on their own. One of the husbands had his wife just was done driving. And it's nice when that happens. In more difficult situations where the driver doesn't want to give up, then you have to be the enforcement officer. And that role, you're the loved one and the primary caregiver, but you're also the jailer and the traffic cop and you get all those unfortunate roles that you have to fill because their safety is critical and they depend on that stuff. So, yes. I don't know for sure, but physiologically, and I'm not a physician, but physiologically, I think that her nervous system was breaking down. At that point, she was just a hair more than 2 months from death. And by mid-July, she was permanently in a wheelchair. And from about the third week of July, she was in bed. She was, bound to a hospital bed just because her body was giving up. And some people die suddenly at that stage. She didn't. I don't know that we chose hospice care because I didn't want any intervention and I knew she didn't want any intervention. This we had talked about a lot over the course. We talked about death. We talked about what we wanted as treatment or not. And so I was confident that the route we took was the route that she wanted. Of course, we had done the POA and all that stuff, and we had all the legal documents in place. I'll be the first to admit that when she died, I felt sadness, but I felt a lot of relief too. And it was relief that her struggle was over. Somewhat that mine was over. I'd face a different struggle at that point. But that, that kind of, when you're living that 24/7 for years, it's huge. All of you who are caregivers know this. And as I said, if you can get help, ask for help. And people often say to me, what should I do? What can I do? Well, if you know the person, if you've known the person for a long time, you know certain things they like. In Judy's case, she loved to go to, we have this lake in the center of town, Holmes Lake. She loved to go to the lake and walk around the lake. So I would have loved it if friends said, oh, Saturday morning, I'll pick Judy up at 9 and I'll take her around Holmes Lake and we'll go to lunch and then you have the whole morning free. That's not what happened, but if you are in a position to do that, do it, because 2 or 3 hours for a caregiver, just to have that little window where they don't have to worry about their charge and they can sort things out or just take a breather or, go play around a golf or, whatever it is. That's huge. And that's what people can do, for sure. Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Kelly, for facilitating. And
Thank you very much. Hold on, don't go yet. I want to give your thumb drive back
thank
for
you.
sure.
yes, thank you.
And a little token from us. Our mission and our vision at the ADRC is to do
Nice.
meaningful work, always improving, driving innovation, and empowering community. And we
It's
think you have
important
done
work.
that. So
Thank
thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
To everybody that's watching on Zoom, thank you for joining us today. At our highest, we had at least 60, and there was one room with about 10 or 12 people in it. So we've had a really lovely turnout today. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing here for just a moment. For those of you who have stuck around on Zoom, thank you very much. To all of you in the room, thank you. Help yourselves to more snacks. Next week's weekly webinar is going to be about metformin and Alzheimer's prevention. And our team at KU Wichita is going to talk about a study they're doing that looks at whether metformin can be useful in preventing Alzheimer's disease. So I think we'll all be interested in hearing what that's like. So we won't be in person, unfortunately, but based on how well this went, I think we'll be working on some future in-person webinars. And one other thing, I just saw Jan. Jan, I'm glad you're here. I'm not picking on you, but we have a copy of Dear Judy in our dementia caregiver library. So if anybody out there wants to read an autographed copy of Dear Judy, we have one here. And Jan, I just saw you and remembered to say that. So thank you. And stay tuned to the My Alliance newsletter. We'll have information about upcoming programs and the dementia library and all kinds of good stuff. All right. So I'm going to wrap up the Zoom, everyone. And those of you in the room, I'm not putting you out. So thank you, everyone, for coming. Oh, and one more reminder coming up for anyone who's interested, we have our dementia training room course. This is an annual event that we do. It's kind of like speed dating for caregivers. It's not really dating though, but you come and you sit at a table for 15-ish minutes and you hear about a topic like communication or driving or bathing, and an expert says, here's what you can do in just bite-sized pieces. And you go around each table for 15 minutes at a time and get some good information. So that's coming up on April 26th, 2 weeks from tomorrow, at North Oak, Good Shepherd United Methodist Church on North Oak Traffic Way. And this has been in the My Alliance newsletter for the last couple of weeks and will continue. Totally free. You can stay all day from 9 to 3 or just as long as you want to. Okay.
What are you talking about?
Okay. All right. Any other questions in the room? Zoom people? Oh, why? Goodness. I need to write these things down. Why? If you haven't seen Why yet, where have you been? And also, you have a chance to see it at the Kansas City Film Festival on Sunday, April 14th, 1:45 at AMC Theater. It is free to attend.
What is it?
And the link is in the My Alliance newsletter.
What's she saying?
So you have to look at your My Alliance newsletter from this week.
What is she saying?
Nice. I'll give you the link. I'll tell you what to do. But basically, go to kcfilmfest.org and you can get why at the film festival, or you can watch it on YouTube.
What is the film festival?
Anything else I forgot, Tina?
Care Assist app.
The Care Assist app. Those of you who like apps, an Apple iPhone or an Android, you can get our Care Assist app that talks about mood and behavior changes. We have some cards with information on how.
What is she saying?
Saying some good stuff. Hang on there.
Marge, just a moment and we'll go over everything with you, Marge.
So we've got an app. It's free. It talks about mood and behavior.
Thank you.
It's kind of like you look up the symptoms you're concerned about, like bathing or driving, and you can find some answers. It's also available as a PDF online if you're not an app person. So we've got cards over there. Yeah. So feel free to. And we are Team iPhone and Team. Music.
Marge, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I have laryngitis.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. So Kelly was talking about the Y showing that we're gonna have this Sunday at the AMC Ward Parkway location. It's at 1:45 and it is in the My Alliance newsletter.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
But boy, we would sure love more discussions like this and to include us on Zoom. It's so helpful to have someone who's really experienced it to talk to all of us. So thank you for those arrangements for today, and hopefully we'll get more in the future. Thanks for all of your efforts.
Thanks, Amy. We appreciate that. All right, take care, everyone.
Thank you. Excellent.